But I do talk about, making sure that we all understand where everybody else is coming from, right? It may be that we have some similarities in our backgrounds, but maybe, even though we may identify similarly, it doesn't mean that we come from the same place in many other ways. And so the intersectionality is really important. So we try to make sure that everybody understands that we want everyone on the team to be able to come and be their authentic self. But that also means we have to take the time to find out what that looks like, right? And how we need to understand how that might change how we interact with individuals, right? And so I think it's, that's really what we do. I do not have a grid or anything like that, but we talk a lot about where we've come from, how we see ourselves, what are the kinds of things that have impacted us as we've moved along. I guess I tend to tell my own stories, right? And the things that have happened when I was in graduate school or when I was growing up, and what it was like with my family. And so I encourage other people to sort of also provide some of that information. And I really encourage folks to think about, I have a specific way of communicating. I have a way, my students all know, and the folks that I work with, at other levels also know that if we're going to have a meeting, don't expect the agenda necessarily from me, although it's not, I have to get better about that with some of the boards that I'm on. But, I tell I have a new graduate student the other day who I told them, if you want to have a set things, group of things that you want to talk about, send them to me, because I have things in my mind, but I'm not sending them to you. And so if you want to make sure, if you're the type of person that needs that agenda, that's great. I'm happy to work with you on that. So I try to make sure they know that we all communicate differently, we all work together differently, and we need to be able to say what we need and what we want. And this is the way I run. If you need something different, you need to tell me.
I'm fond of saying Brene Brown is my best friend. She just doesn't know it. She's my imaginary best friend. She talks about vulnerability being the birthplace of creativity. And I try to be authentic with the people that I supervise and that I mentor. And if it will serve, I will bring forward an example from my own life. If you look at my CV, it looks really pretty stellar. It is the redacted version of my life. It is the Facebook version of my life. And I've had many, many setbacks in my career, things that didn't go my way, leadership opportunities that for a variety of reasons I did not get. So I try to model that vulnerability, that a lot of life is about, not the triumphs, but how do you take a setback and learn from it? One of my favorite expressions is you win or you learn, not you win or you lose. So how do we reframe setbacks and try to understand, if we had a do-over, what would we do differently? Or maybe we wouldn't do anything differently, but how do we settle and practice gratitude and self-compassion for ourselves that, we did the best we could do. The other thing that I do with my mentees that I think is very helpful is I as I spoke earlier about, I encourage feedback. I request absolutely no nasty emails. That's actually one of my huge things, email etiquette. Don't ever send a nasty or an angry email. It just always, in my experience, always backfires. I request that they and also I ask them not to let it build up for 6 months. You get to the point where there's so much water under the bridge, you can't undo the damage. There's too much hurt. And so I ask them, feedback is best when it's specific, timely, and behaviorally based. So don't tell me I'm a racist or a sexist or an elitist. Just sit down, call me in and say, when you said this, when you did this, I felt this. I cannot speak to your intention. I can speak to your impact. This was the impact. That's going to help me shift.
We use quarterly check-ins, and those are divided into 2 separate reports and 2 separate meetings with everybody in my lab. These skill development is one, professional activities is another that has to do with maybe presenting at a conference or publishing in a certain journal or writing a review article or something that might be more outcome-oriented like that. And the other aspects are all about the research culture in the laboratory. So we have prompts that speak specifically towards the mentee-mentor relationship, but also with respect to the lab cultural values. I mean, a lot of this is the way we implement some accountability for what we have written and agreed are our shared values as a lab. We believe in having an inclusive environment. We believe in having a supportive environment. We believe in having an environment that values teamwork and also makes space for individual achievement. That's great, but you have to check to see if that's happening. And so we use different prompts in the quarterly report to see when it is, and importantly, to make it comfortable to flag when it's not, because this is, I think, from my standpoint, part of establishing a culture that expects continual improvement rather than thinks we are perfect and then it's somehow scary to question whether things are the way that they should be or could be improved.
So we are developing and going through a 1-year review in the Department of Medicine to really understand what are we doing now, what is current state, and how can we be our best selves? How can we more effectively recruit and as importantly, or perhaps more importantly, retain and advance the people that we have recruited? The other thing that we've been doing and I think is helpful is by expanding the definition of what we mean by diverse, the same way the NIH has. So diversity is race, ethnicity, which we're all familiar with, but it also has to do with socioeconomic disadvantage. It also has to do with disabilities. Not infrequently, when people can think in their own experience or among their family members, they can gain access to understanding what it is like to be othered. For me, I had a child who had a disability, and that was my window in to some of the experiences that people who have identities that are not the classic, white, male, extrovert, whatever, might experience. Allyship is something that you have to practice every day. You have to keep thinking, what are my blind spots? An example, 2 examples. I used to say, that is so lame. That is profoundly offensive and ableist language, and I had never heard myself until I heard myself. Similarly, I talked about the reason why I'm still at Boston Medical Center is because I came to Boston City Hospital and finally found my tribe. And I looked that up, and I said it, of course, in a diversity meeting. My timing is always impeccable. And I realized, that's actually cultural appropriation. And I'm somebody who tries to think about that, so I converted it to, I finally found my people. So I tell that it's sort of embarrassing examples, and at the same time, all of us have opportunities to continually expand our understanding of inclusive excellence. Those of us who care, I would encourage them to read. I would encourage them to participate in trainings. On the medical campus, we have a training called LIFT, which really encourages listening, intention versus impact, full stop, and TEACH. That's what the acronym is. So we try to give people ongoing skills-based practice to continue to evolve. The other thing is that I encourage people to be honest with their mentees. I remember the first time I mentored an African-American male. It was not lost on him that I was a white lady from the North, and he was, an African-American guy from, the South. I said, look obviously we have very different identities, and I may misstep. And if I do, please call me in. Please let me know. Assume that my intent is good. My impact may not be. Now, having said that, it is not somebody diverse with a diverse identity to educate us. And so that is by permission. Surface the conversation, give people permission to say, I don't want to talk about that because it isn't their job to educate me. If that is the case, point me to a resource where I should get my own education. But I try to encourage people to surface conversations. Feedback is a gift. That is my mantra.